All right, welcome everyone, and welcome folks who are live streaming to us over Zoom. We're so glad that you're all here. This is LNS 25, Letters and Sciences 25, Creativity and Practice, Thinking Through Arts and Design, co-taught by my fantastic teacher, co-teacher, Greg Niemeyer, who's here. This is our last class. Students in the house, give yourself a big round of applause for making it to the end of the semester. Woohoo! In the spirit of kind of wrapping up, I just want to give a huge shout out and thanks to everyone here who's helped us put these live streams together and be in this theater here at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. It's been incredible. Thank you so much, Taylor, Doug, everyone, the ushers over this semester. It's been really a fantastic experience to have so many great speakers here. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Laurel Lawson and her talk today, Art is an Experience, UX, Access and Equity. For those of you who are on Zoom, there is going to be live captioning there, and I'm going to switch over to the live captioning now for those here in the space. Experiencing art is a negotiation between instigator and participant, not necessarily bound to a technical medium. Intentional design processes can help us make better art and better experiences. Grounded in disabled understandings of the value of multiplicity of embodiment and experience, choreographer, designer, and engineer, Laurel Lawson's talk today is going to move from transdisciplinary art making and decentering design practice to equitable aesthetic accessibility and technology ethics and leadership. Laurel is just an astonishing person. It's been fun to have breakfast with you this morning and get to know you more. We're preparing for this talk. She is a dancer, designer, engineer for a company called Kinetic Light. She's a primary costume and makeup designer and contributes other technical and production design aspects and designs wheelchairs that she and Alice Shepard, her co-collaborator with Kinetic Light, use in performance. She's also a product designer and lead for access software initiatives such as Audiments, which she'll talk about a bit today, the company's app, which revolutionizes audio description for non-visual audiences, and primary curriculum author and teacher for Access, called Always. So I just want to welcome Laurel to the stage, and she'll be giving our talk today. So welcome, Laurel.
Thank you, Lisa and Greg, for having me here today. I know there was a little bit of a setup there, and I'm actually going to turn it around and go in reverse order. So I'll begin with 3 ideas. First, a truth. Everything begins with asking the right questions. Second, a provocation. Designers are the midwives of power. And third, a useful truism. Design in any domain thrives by a common set of principles. Design is not a thing. Design is not static. Design is a practice. Design is a set of principles in action. No matter what your specialty, no matter what particular content field you choose to work in, spatial, visual, tactile, graphic, holographic, curricular, behavioral, environmental, industrial, business, communications, digital, process, material, prosthetic, civil, software, entertainment, infrastructure. Whether you're designing for the movement of human bodies, the movement of water, the movement of information. Some things are true, and I'm using true here in a professional sense, which means loosely useful, no matter what field of content you choose to apply them to. Designers tell stories. Even if you're designing physical objects, you are telling a story about what this object is, about the way that we move through the world in, around, with an object. Designers shape the world to the minds and bodies of the people in space. Before any domain-specific techniques or knowledge, there are principles, processes, and aspects of practice that are common across all of these disciplines. To be a thoughtful, ethical, and skillful designer is to participate in a community of these principles. Yes, I'm leading off with ethics. That may sound a little bit dry, but there's a reason that I begin here. Design does not have an intrinsic moral service. Design can be used to benefit, and it can be used to oppress. There are skillful and effective designers creating and implementing both bright and deceptive patterns. I should probably pause and go into that for just a second. First, complexity in design is conserved. This is getting a little bit technical, but when we are undertaking a process, when we are creating a thing, the complexity of using the thing is conserved. That is to say, the complexity, the labor of using it is not created or destroyed, but the designer holds the power of relocating that, whether that labor goes to the designer or to the user, for example. But that's an entire talk in and of itself. What I think is important here is our motivations around where and how that is placed. Bright patterns can make a user's life easier, can make the flow of information transparent, can facilitate choices that a user wants to make. Deceptive patterns. Well, when's the last time you clicked on something you really didn't want to click on? I bet it was within the last couple of days. We do not talk about this as much or as openly as we should. And that's one of the reasons why I do talk about it. Fundamentally, the job of a designer is to manipulate people. We can do that for good, or we can do that for ill. The way in which you choose to do it, to deceive the user for someone else's benefit or to benefit the end user, is up to your own ethical choices. Obviously, I have opinions about which way I think people should choose, but I'm an optimist, and I think it's possible to create a better world. There are any number of products out in the world now. Let me take Clearview AI as an example. Is everybody sort of loosely familiar with what that is? No? Okay, this was a big story a few years ago, and it's sad that it's fallen out of awareness now. Clearview is the product that scrapes your image from any kind of public source and a few not public sources, and turns around and sells those databases to law enforcement. The technical capacity to create that product existed for 2 decades before this came onto the market. But there were a small enough set of shops in the world that could have built it. It required enough expertise that no one did it. And I say that because, yes, my shop was one of the ones approached several times over the years to build something very like that. However, the cat's out of the bag, and now many of these choices fall into the laps of us as individuals, as engineers, as designers. This is a troubling and very present set of choices that all of you are going to go out into the world and face, sadly, where we've entered this toxic form of capitalism, where the harms created by these technologies and their designed implementations are not falling on the same accounting sheet as the profits. So, in design, in ethical design, we have to account for our harms as well as our good. And all of that can be entirely separate from how much money our products bring in. Ultimately, I think design should serve the user. And in that sense, the meaning of that is created by the designer. Ironically, the best functional design is often that which is invisible. One of the goals of design is to remove barriers to right action and to full experience. And that means the design should disappear. If you're paying attention to the design, you're not paying attention to the thing that the design is meant to serve. So that makes it really hard for an egotist to be a good designer. You know, if you want to be at the center of attention, that's cool. You do you. Pick a different role. Designers facilitate experience and interpretation of the world. Design permeates our world. Everything which has ever had intentional thought applied to it is a product of design. And great design is where we fuse engineering and art. We apply the principles of science to practical goals. We use the principles and techniques of art via creative practice to make it beautiful and meaningful. Design is a discipline, it is a practice, and good design is data-driven. So, asking the right questions. To be an effective designer, you must have an excellent understanding of research. If you are not yourself designing and conducting research, you'll be relying on the people who are, and you'll be applying the outcomes of that research, the data you receive in response to those questions. That was a big chunk of stuff, so I'm going to pause there for a second. I should probably tell you who I am to sit up here and jabber on at you about design and ethics. As Lisa shared, my name is Laurel Lawson. Fundamentally, I'm a product architect. I am a white woman with cropped hair, lavender-ish today, wearing a long sleeve teal shirt and gray pants. My chair is black and silver. My understanding of product, what that means to me is very broad. A product can be a performance, it can be a dance or a video, it can be an app or a service, it can be a material object, it can be an environment. Some other titles that are occasionally useful to me are artist engineer, someone who uses technology for the creation and deployment of art, or who creates novel technology for art, and choreographer. I started working in tech prior to .com1, which I realize for probably almost everybody here is a historical event, and began dancing professionally in 2004. Something that's important to me personally, because I'm working across multiple fields and types of practice, is understanding the differences and the commonalities between art and design. Again, that can be an entire talk by itself, but to try to get it in short. Design is in service to a purpose. Design serves a set of users. Art has a voice, and great art should leave the user of art here being both artist and audience, changed. So, one in service of purpose, one in service of meaning. The commonality, creativity, and process. And while we're at it, we can throw disability into that mix in those commonalities of creativity and process. As we're thinking about design and the ways we encounter and experience it, as we're thinking about the ways in which experience can be designed, as we're thinking about, in fact, the user experience of art. There, see, we got back around to the nominal topic of this talk. I'm going to share with you a couple of products that span a number of technical domains and a number of types of design. You might find this useful in that any single field you personally choose to work in is going to necessarily involve multiple types of design, and almost certainly working in a multidisciplinary team. If ever there was the age of the single hero designer, it has passed. And we can generalize that across a lot of fields. The vast, vast majority of great work does now, and in fact has always, come from a team. I'm kind of known for harping on this a little bit. And in fact, my quote that I often use about synthesis, 1 + 1 makes 3, wound up as the title of a Kinetic Light episode that KQED produced during the pandemic. So the whole is, in design, in creative pursuits, almost always greater than the sum of the parts. The products I'm going to share with you from my own practice have a common thread, of course, in that they are designed to center disabled users. To be very precise, they are designed to center subsets of disabled users who have a commonality of type of access method. Cutting out on that for just a second. Disability is not a dirty word. Disability does not refer to impairment. That is to say, disability is not a medical diagnosis. Disability says nothing about who you are, how you move in the world, how you experience things, how you access the world. Disability is a political and cultural identity. When we talk about access, we talk about ways in which people experience the world, ways in which people are in the world. When we talk about the giant umbrella of disabled users generally, we are talking about an incredible diversity of ways of moving, communicating, thinking, being. We often refer to this in the field as a diversity of embodiment, of sensoria, of mind-body, or other terms, where we are considering the physicality, the nature of the body-mind as an entity, the ways in which we are in the world. And Access, like design, access is not a static thing. It's not a checklist. Access is a culture. Access is a conversation, and it's a set of practices. When we're talking about design, access cannot be separated from design, and access cannot be separated from art. Why is that? If we come in after the fact, if we come in after a thing is made, and then we try to tack access on at the end, it will never be equitable. Let's actually pick on this theater for just a moment, just because it's fresh. Sorry, Lisa. You probably came up a set of stairs to come in here. Somebody didn't think beforehand that, oh, maybe some people who come into this theater can't climb steps. So they had to build a cutout. There's a little corridor and there's an elevator and it comes back in right at the top of the steps. I mean, A, it's an incredible expense. B, it's not equitable. It is a separation. It is a bottleneck in the flow. It takes longer. It's more vulnerable because elevators, of course, break a whole lot more than stairs do. There was an opportunity, there was space there to design, to consider from the beginning a beautiful way, perhaps a ramp that would be beautiful and joyous, perhaps another method, perhaps to bring the whole thing in at ground level. But that's one example of what happens in a very kind of concrete, clear, and feel free to check it out on the way out kind of way of, oops, we didn't think about this. Now we have to make something that doesn't work as well, isn't equitable, and once again, was really, really expensive to have to go back and fix. So, creating access to be access, post facto, relegated, is always going to fail. Let's start. Okay, we got a ton of questions about wheelchairs. So let's start there. Designing bodies. And let's start with prosthetics. Limb prostheses have been well established as wearable sculpture. Examples of the intersection of engineering, art, aesthetic design, and disability. From the Eames splint and the reconstructive facial sculptures post-World War I. I mean, seriously, gorgeous work. Go look it up. To the work of contemporary artists, such as Lisa Bufano, such as Una Burke. The merging of figurative sculpture and high fashion grabs the imagination quite easily and shakes it to ask questions about space, form, and humanity. One of the unique privileges of some of us with physical disabilities is that of multiple embodiments. The ability to actually have multiple radically different bodies. In this form, my frame and wheels are as much my body as skin and bone. I can also transition into other embodiments, perhaps using crutches, perhaps on the floor. After all, if I were to jump out here, it's a little gruesome isn't it? To now think about me being like split in two, it provokes some very odd images. But this in and of itself is a whole and complete body, as is this. So multiple embodiments, understanding chairs, prosthetics, crutches, other mobility devices as designing bodies, as designing ways of being physicalized in the world. Chairs are also a really popular student design project. I mean, they're pretty basic devices, right? There's 4 wheels, you sit in them, they go. It seems very simple. And then somehow this often goes wrong. I'm reminded of one project where there was an initiative that someone wanted to make a chair where dancers could have their arms free to move with on stage and not have to have hands on the wheels. So this chair had little pedals and switches, foot pedals and side leg switches and buttons and things to move. And they asked me to come test it out. And I'm looking at it like, okay, I'm not sure why you want me to test it because I can get in it and, unless I like flop my legs around, I'm not going to be able to go anywhere. The chair was designed thinking like someone who has full control of their legs, feet. One of the switches even required toes. Other examples. How about the stair climbing chair? This one seems to come around about twice a year. Sounds like a great idea, right? Stairs are everywhere. This is an approach. Across any kind of access, there is a tendency to think that we're going to just create something that makes the disabled person a non-disabled person. That actually doesn't work. And furthermore, it's not desirable. That is not and should not be the goal, because that continues to deny the value and the diversity of disability. Adapting per person. The stair climbing chair is an easy example again because they're really expensive. They're really fragile. They're one per person. If you want to actually use one on an ongoing basis, you need, then that automatically means you're in a power chair. So you need a van that can accommodate one with a lift or a extending ramp. It's a huge amount of sort of per person expenditure when, okay, maybe we could just work around the stairs. We could design something that works for everyone who comes to that location. So there is a necessity of understanding from the inside. Again, we're back to asking the right questions. And when I take this on in my own practice, I'm thinking about this from some very particular functional requirements. This is In fact, one of the chairs I co-designed with Paul Schulte, who is probably one of the best chair engineers, if not the best in the world. It is far from suitable for everything. It is designed for some very, very particular functions. The capacity to tolerate sustained and impact forces from any direction, the ability to balance on any individual wheel, the ability to take force in lateral and very slight angles to which a usual chair is weak. And I believe some of you have access to the auxiliary materials where I actually demonstrate some of the test runs. Lisa, I think this might be a good moment to throw that video up. One of the other things this was designed for is to facilitate the perception of our bodies in artistic and aesthetic modes, no matter what orientation we're in. So.
Departures presents a dance studio walls of windows. Alice, a black dancer on her belly. An elastic aerial cable attached to her wheelchair draws her back until she floats. Sails back down, bounces up again. Studio moments, Wired, performed by Alice Shepard and Laurel Lawson of Kinetic Light. Alice continues to bounce, her arms expanding at the top each time, and touching down, folds into herself. Her luminous clothing shimmers in the sunlight. She reaches the highest point, a brief stillness before gliding back down. Her shirt ripples as she soars again. She pedals along the floor with her hands, then high up, rests her fingers around the cable and spins. A gentle smile. Then Laurel, a white dancer, returns the smile. They tenderly clasp forearms. In unison, they lean back in the wheelchairs, are carried into the air. They swing in long, pendulous arcs, holding hands, embracing. Then Alice hovers in front of Laurel, reaches back to take Laurel's hands, and together they swing. They continue to float above the gray marley dance floor together, pitching forward and back. Laurel on the ground, she grabs Alice's wheelchair, and they surge into the air. Alice's arms outspread, wings, as Laurel hangs below. They spin. Laurel dips down into Alice's lap, then rolls in a wide circle, holding Alice's hands as Alice floats a foot above the ground. They twist and turn together, gazes locked. Alice at the apex, she holds Laurel's hand as Laurel leans into one wheel and traces a spacious ring on the shiny gray floor. Their arms curve, they balance, still, patient. From high above, Alice draws herself to Laurel, who holds Alice's wheelchair. A slow spin as Alice caresses Laurel's face. Cheek to cheek, Alice's head falls onto Laurel's shoulder. They bow gently forward. Laurel lies along Alice's legs, wheels above. Then Laurel takes a handstand. Suspended again, she turns tight circles, a vortex with her arms stretched downward at the center. Alice lying on her back, arms wide. She is pulled aloft and flies up and out of view, snap to black.
So this is where we, oh, sorry, let's go back to the captions. I'm about to talk about the lack of necessity of, lack of centrism of vision. So, you know, keeping it dim would have been okay too. So there we see the places where art and design meet, that there is an artistic purpose as well as the designed purpose. Segueing off of that, you heard the voice of Cheryl Green there doing single track audio description. Dance is not a visual art. Dance is a kinesthetic art. By prioritizing watching dance, by being ocular centric, to use the formal academic term here, we're creating this sense of distance. The truest way of experiencing dance is to do the movement. You could, in fact, say that the only people who truly experience the art are the performers themselves. And this is something that dancers know intuitively as we pass movement from body to body in an embodied knowing. We find things out by moving through them. We solve problems by figuring out what their movement is, how the problems exist inside of us, and how we solve them. So, vision is already secondhand. So, why not experience dance through sound? Let's imagine. Imagine you're in a large room. And for everyone here, this doesn't take very much imagination, but for everyone joining us on the stream, imagine you're in a large room. There can be speakers located anywhere in the space. Maybe they're in the ceiling, in the corners, floating in the middle of the air. Every speaker is playing a different track. Every track is part of the same performance. You enter the room and the performance begins. You can choose your experience. You can wander around the room, listening to the tracks shift and flow. You can cuddle up to one speaker and listen to it from beginning to end. You can find a mix that pleases you and just hang out there. Shrink all of that down into your phone and you've got Automats. But why? Well, this came about because when Alice and I, you just saw Alice there in that video as well, we're actually doing our very first process showing of part of our first evening length work together, Descent. And this was actually down at Counterpulse. We didn't know how it would be received, so we did a showing. We invited our friends, no small number of our enemies, our students, our mentors, our elders, our communities. And for the most part, it was received incredibly well. But afterwards, some of our blind colleagues came up to us and said, we could hear people gasping. We could feel them leaning forward in their seats. And there just wasn't anything that exciting in the audio description. What happened? What did we miss? We had failed. Movement is vast, and sight is a broadband sense. You can take in a lot of information all at once. You can see an entire stage full of dancers. You can focus in on a few or one. You can make choices about your experience. Audio description, as conventionally delivered, is one person speaking. Usually live, seated up in the booth. Maybe they've seen the show once or twice before to make a bit of an outline for themselves. There is a narrowband experience created after the fact by someone who was not part of the artistic process. And there is no choice. There is take it or leave it. So we needed to address these three issues. After a great deal of thought, after a lot of time working through options, working through sketches, scribbles, prototypes. And after a lot of time listening, the design for Automance was born. It solves agency by providing multiple options. It solves for equity by providing the capacity to create artful description that is created as a part of the artistic process, that is created by the artists themselves and putting it into this framework. And it solves for both complexity and choice by providing options to listen for the skilled listener to 4 or 5 tracks at once, or to narrow it down to 1 track at a time. And here, Automance would not exist in a world governed by the principles of universal design. Universal design says that there is one way that can work for everyone. Do any of y'all still believe in Santa Claus? Okay, Santa Claus. Santa Claus is a lie to children. Santa Claus serves a purpose. We lie and we tell children this story that there is a magical man in the sky who watches over them all the time, who sees when they are being naughty. We tell this lie because when children are too young to understand that there are reasons to not be naughty in whatever way the parent might define that. And some of those reasons are just because your mother really doesn't want to kill you right now. We tell this lie to children. It is hopefully, ideally, a movement towards education. I call universal design a lie to managers because sometimes we have to tell that lie. Sometimes we have to say, this is going to benefit everyone. Okay, how fucked up is that really? That we have to say, it's okay, this is going to benefit you too. We can't just say, this is good for this set of people, so we need to do it. We have to say, it's going to benefit you personally also. That's actually not right, folks. So sometimes this is a lie that we need to use, and it is important to understand that a true universal for all design really doesn't exist. I would go into some detail about this and talk about curb cuts for a bit, and I'm not going to do it right now because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So, what is the alternative, though? If we don't think about things as universality, if we don't think about what's going to be best for everybody, what do? We use the tools of design. First, we define who are our users. Let's take Automance. The first night we ever deployed it, this is what you call a live fire alpha. It had been tested in dress rehearsal, but it was recoded the week before because of something not very nice that Apple did. And this was code going into production basically untested. So thank goodness it worked. I think there were 2 reboots on the server that night, but it worked. But after the show, you know, Alice and I are downstairs getting out of the 3 pounds of makeup that show requires. Yes, I'm also the costume designer. Don't ask. Trying to get into something respectable to rush back up to the lobby and you know, do the premiere meet and greet thing. And I get out of the elevator in the lobby, and immediately this very large, incredibly red-faced man just starts screaming at me that I had ruined his night. And I mean, this was so loud and so incoherent, and I'm just kind of like being buffeted. It took about 5 minutes to figure out what was going on. I had left instructions with our folks in the lobby that the software was for people who use audio description only. There was a ton of interest, of course. There's an app. Oh, everyone wants the app. The app must be something special. The app is something extra. Well, hey, the app's not for everyone. The app's for people who use audio description. But somehow this guy had bullied his way into getting access to it. He had he'd kept it on for about 5 minutes, the first 5 minutes of the show, and afterwards, well over an hour and a half later, this was the result, that he was still having this kind of full-blown tantrum. This is why things aren't universal. Automance was designed to center a very particular set of people. And for folks who are not users of audio description, who are trying to watch and listen, it can in some cases produce extreme sensory overload. That was a fascinating discovery. I mean, we learned so much more about how our products break, and sometimes how our products break the users. But this is one way of, an extreme example, certainly, of thinking about how you can decenter yourself, decenter your own experience, if you are ever designing for someone who is not yourself. Ask the right questions and listen. Really, really listen to the answers that you get back. So this is how I found a pathway to understanding how to design something that is not for me. I can create audio description, but it is not my first or primary way of experiencing the world. It is a way in which I have learned, and it will never be my own to claim. So, centering people, taking that information and testing to create a rich and immersive experience. A couple thoughts to wrap up. I've been talking about creativity. I've been talking about research. And This is actually probably the #1 topic that people ask me to talk about. For some reason, people are a lot more interested in hearing about creativity than they are about, ethics and team management and leadership and all of those other topics. And of course, as both artist and designer, I'm supposed to know something about it. I know that there are 3 ways you might approach creativity, because you can't just sit there and expect the answers to arrive. That actually doesn't work so well. We can take the disciplined approach. To paraphrase Sherlock Holmes, when you've eliminated the possible and the probable, we can work through, beginning with the nearest or the simplest or the most likely, and imagine bit by bit by bit. It is grinding, and it works. You wind up mapping the space, imagining all the possibilities. Another way we can approach this, and this is part of how I've been talking about it, the empathic approach. Empathy here, I do not mean empathy as, oh, I can feel what you're feeling. Like universal design, that's actually not possible. We do not have the capacity or the right to take on somebody else's lived experience, but there is a way through. Empathy, what if we say empathy is, I cannot feel what you are feeling, and I accept that your thoughts and feelings are just as real and valid as mine. This is hard. This is legit hard, and it's kind of advanced adulting. So there we are getting into that approach of going and asking and actually, listening and acting onto what you get. A lot of people get the first part of that, the go and ask. And then I've seen a lot of people just kind of throw that away and do what they want to do with it. As a design consultant, when I get called in, that's one of the first things I look at. It's like, where's your research? Okay. What did you do with that? How did you get from this data to this product? And a lot of times there was just that's not what we wanted to hear. It doesn't work like that. For a third approach, I might term this the meditative approach. To quiet your consciousness, to take in everything about the field and try to find the connections. Now, this is really kind of a trick question because all 3 of these methods work best when you're doing all of them at once, and none of them will work 100% of the time. So design is a practice. It is something that you have to engage in. If not every day, at least every week. This is something where creativity is a skill, is a capacity that you cultivate. If you do not cultivate it, it will not come on demand. It's not some magical facility that some people are born with and others aren't. It is something that each one of you has the power to bring up, to grow, and it just takes the work of doing it. If these are the fields that you're interested in pursuing, if you want to work in, or hey, think you might want to work in the fields of art or design, then you're going to need the skill and capacity of creativity. And I hope you'll invest the time that is there when you need to call on it. Okay, I think we probably ought to wrap up there, and we've got maybe 15 for questions. That went a little longer than I promised Lisa, but you know.
Oh, it's great. Let's, Laurel, thank you so much for that incredible presentation of brilliant ideas and really making me think so differently about the world. And it was interesting on Tuesday, I shared some of the principles of universal design, and hearing you talk about that now, it's like, no, I'm really glad I shared them, because now they were introduced to it to say, well, yeah, this is something we should question about how what we're building for, and who are the users, and this more sort of
It's in the
specificity.
space. We have to know it. We have to be able to use it. We have to be able to speak that language. And knowing that it's not real is still important.
Right, to somehow get around some of the principles of it, or the language of it, so then you can challenge it or bring a different perspective. A lot of art making functions that way too. I think, when people are subverting ideas, you have to sometimes bring forth the idea that you're subverting to comment on it. Let's open it up. Greg is going to be monitoring the Zoom webinar, but students in the class, this is our last day together. So crazy that it went so fast. It's been so wonderful to have you all in class, but any thoughts? You can even ask a question. I did share some of your questions with Laurel, but you can ask the question that you wrote on Tuesday's class as well, because we have a lot of people in the webinar that might want to hear those questions. So anybody here would like to go with a question? And then Greg has some. Anybody in the room? All right, yes. Greg, can you pass your mic back? We're going to be using microphones for the so everyone can hear, and also for the webinar. Thanks.
I was wondering if you had like a favorite thing that you've designed, considering what you've designed over the years. I know that's a very broad question.
But yeah. That one is big, yeah. Favorite. It's hard not to love the things that I use most directly. So of course, all the chairs I've designed over the years are most near and dear to me in terms of proximity. But, other things, I might talk about some of my work in tech, mainstream tech, actually, designing interfaces for emergency communication systems, or designing the interfaces for educational training software for air traffic control. I love those products because they are complex. In my UI specialty is essentially mission critical interfaces, where there might be 10 functions that you use every day, but you have to have 50 more that have to be available and require no thought to use in an emergency. So yeah. Also, come on, it's like asking me to pick a favorite child.
Greg, is there one on the
Yeah.
webinar? Oh, okay. Why don't we go for one more live here, and then we'll do the webinar next. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out and giving this talk to us. I guess my question was, you're talking about UI UX. So I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm currently interested in like learning more about program development and like developing apps. So in general, like, when you're trying to identify like what the needs of a user is, how do you go about like, I guess like, do you like interview them, or do you like, like kind of observe them as they're like using their current solution to the problem? Like, how do you figure out the needs and like figure out how to address the pain point of the user when you're designing like a UI UX, for example?
So this is, I could answer this with a whole toolkit. And I strongly suspect there's at least one course around here, probably in HCI, that addresses this. But in short, you know, all of those things, observation is a critical tool. Interviews are important, but I like to really begin. Have you ever heard of the technique of the 5 whys? Sometimes it's called the 7. When I'm talking about centering users, when I'm talking about really understanding who your user is, and this is not exactly, you know, a lot of you have probably already learned about, you know, developing personas and, you know, plotting their little imaginary pathways. Much more core is getting to a set of needs. And if you're going into a standard kind of business consulting situation, the odds are your user may very likely not know what they actually need. They're going to say, well, I want this. Why do you want this? Because this. Okay, why that? Because we need this. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Okay, let's talk about, you know, what that's about. And once you go through these layers of asking why, and you do have to be a little diplomatic about this so you don't sound like a 3-year-old. But generally it takes at least 5, sometimes 7. I've even had to go up to like 9 a few times. You have to get to what is the underlying need, not we want this form to have different fields on it necessarily, but what is the real underlying issue? And the solution to that may not be an app at all. It could be a process, it could be a thing, it could be infrastructure, it might be anything, but never take the first answer. Use everything in your tool set. As you gain experience, if this is something that you choose to do, you will eventually get a sense for what is needed in a situation. And it's important to stay humble. Don't get cocky. Don't assume. Don't think you can go in there and answer this without using your tools, because that is when you go off the rails. So there you go. 20 odd, well, closer to 30 years of tech design and consulting experience in a nutshell.
Thank you. Should
Yeah,
I
go
go with the
ahead,
online
Greg.
question? So in the Q&A, there's 2 questions right now by Shreya. And Shreya wants to know, how do you know when you've gotten a design right? And what do you use for inspiration to fuel your creativity?
Okay, so the inspiration question, I think I may have hopefully addressed a little bit. Inspiration is a false friend. There is no magic bullet. You know, the idea that this, you know, bolt strikes you and blesses you with this perfect moment of creativity. I'm not going to say it never happens, but that's like, if that happens to you once in a lifetime as a designer, take it as a gift. So the trick, to be a professional, you do not rely on inspiration, you rely on your practice, you rely on that cultivation of creative practice. When I've gotten a design right, Okay, right's also a tricky word here. So what does right mean? Does right mean good enough? Does right mean alpha? Does it mean beta? Does it mean let's push it to prod and see what happens? That's really situational. There are, some things you may develop a sense with time, with experience, about when you're on the right path. But in design, as in development, as in almost anything, if we want to get it right, we have to be iterative. We have to accept there is always something better. I often say this about access in all forms. Access is aspirational. There is no right. There is never a perfect. We can only try. We work towards it. We can work our butts off at it. And when we get feedback, when we get critique, we pause, we take that in, and we use that to do better next time. So, yeah, really the whole concept of right is the thing to interrogate here. We can apply the same thing to art. Let's take that little bit of video, burial video that you saw. Every one of those things was extensively tweaked before getting to a nominally final point of being released out into the world. In software terms, version 1.0. And each of those things is still being refined when we restage shows, even as we're touring. There are little tweaks, little incremental improvements happening to the experience, whether that's the sonic, the visual, the haptic. Of course, it's a little hard to get the haptic experience from a video. That's actually one of the projects I'm currently working on, is figuring out just how we do that. But yeah, I'd encourage you to really sit with the idea of right and what that means to you and what that means in each context. Examining, because that's going to mean something different for every design, for every product, for every project, for every team. And you're probably never going to reach it. Yay!
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. I think that's a great way to wrap up, because in many ways, so many things that you've said today have just resonated through the entirety of this class. And these assignments we've been giving you are really about your creativity in practice, which is what Laurel is saying, to rely on the practice of doing things that really help hone your creativity and get you ready for designing things or making things or working on things together. So it's, I think, a really wonderful closing to have Laurel here to really wrap up so many of the ideas we've been talking about in class. And yeah, let's just give one last round of applause. And thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you, those of you on the Zoom webinar, for being here as well. And it was really such an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Thank you all. Okay, cards you can get.